All right, excellent. Now we'll start. I apologize for the couple-minute delay there. So welcome to the Map the Gap Symposium. We were going back over our notes. We think this started 2008, 2009, perhaps. So we're on year 12, we think, or year 13, depending on how you look at it, because we did have two in 2021. We had the Map the Gap Symposium in January that was hosted virtually from the UN in Paris. It was a great, successful event. And because of the way the schedules lined up, we decided to do it again in the same year, which is unusual. It is usually just once a year. But this event it's a Jebco event on bathymetry. It's had many names over the years: Science Day, Bathymetry Day. A few years ago, we landed on Map the Gap Symposium because that's what we're really talking about is mapping the gaps of the planet and trying to fill in all those spaces so we can get a higher resolution continuous surface of the ocean floor. This is Jebco, as many of you know, is the General Bathymetric Charter of the Oceans. It's a joint program under the auspices of the International Hydrographic Organization and UNESCO's Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. We also partnered with the UN Decade of Ocean Science this year as part of the overall mission to map the global oceans, and we welcome you today. So we have a full agenda, not super full, it's 4 days, this is the kickoff session for Map the Gap Symposium. Right on your screen there is, if you go to our website, mapthegaps.org, that'll take you straight in. You'll see the link for symposium, or you can go directly to symposium-2021-redux, and the full agenda is there. We do have sessions ranging from technology innovations. We have equity and economic equity in ocean mapping. We have what's going on with Jebco, Nippon Foundation alumni, sessions on public policy and awareness, public perception and awareness. We have the subcommittee roundup as well, which is Jebco has several subcommittees which organize and help guide the whole organization, along with the guiding committee, of course. So some of those meetings are happening this week. And then we have, right after this session, we have regional initiatives in ocean mapping. Tomorrow we have topics on the Nippon Foundation Jebco project Seabed 2030 and another technology innovation session. We have two of those, another session on regional innovations. And then we also have, and I think it's later today, we have a session on crowdsource bathymetry, what's going on in that. So there's loads of sessions. Some of them are panelists, some of them are presenters, some of them are a mix of both. And each one is 10 or 15 minutes long, depending on. Everything is in sked.com. That's the agenda system that we use. And so I invite you to check it out. If you need to contact myself or my co-host, so I'll tell you in a second a little more about me, but Aya Roperez she's behind the scenes, and she's my partner on this, and we've been doing this for, I think this is our 6th one, and so that we've been doing as a team, and we do it for Jebco on behalf of Jebco. For panelists and presenters, please stay on video while your session is on. All attendees are muted. It's just the way Zoom works. However, if you have questions, please pop them into the chat. We'll try to pick those up and surface those to the top. Everything is being recorded, so if you're a presenter or panelist and you're not too keen on that, please let us know so we can make whatever changes we need to make. And I put some popular Twitter handles on there if you wouldn't mind tweeting about this event or sharing on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok, Telegram, Snapchat, whatever your flavor is. We'd appreciate that as well. So my name is Tim Kearns, and welcome you today. I'm going to try to go fairly quickly here. I've only got one more slide, I think. This is it. So I'm the CIO at the Great Lakes Observing System, and you're thinking, why are the Great Lakes here? Well, the Great Lakes are, 21% of the world's fresh water. It's a pretty big body of water, and believe it or not, they have not been mapped as well as the great oceans So we're also embarking on an ambitious program to map the Great Lakes. You'll hear more about that actually from Hans Van Zumeren from Northern Michigan College in Traverse City. He's in the next session to talk about Lakebed 2030, aptly named. And so that's one of the programs that I'm doing for GLOSS, or the Great Lakes Observing System. And we've just released a new platform to share information and data in the Great Lakes. I'm also the founder of Map the Gaps, which is the nonprofit that runs this conference and does many other things, along with a host of supporting mapping missions and for the public good in the science domain, typically for things like Seabed 2030 or other activities. We just finished a project in Curacao for the Proteus Ocean Group, and that's what Fabian Cousteau on the next session is going to talk about. So stay tuned if you're able to hang around for that session as well. That'd be good. And I'm also on one of the subcommittees as the vice chair of SCOPE, which is a subcommittee for outreach and public engagement. So I apologize for not having a photo of Dr. Zachary Zohu. So this individual is coming to us from IOC Africa, which is one of the co-hosts of this event. And normally this event moves around the world. However, it's virtual again this year. Fingers crossed that 2022 will be back to normal and perhaps some travel, but I think the virtual component has been so successful for this symposium. I think there's 400 people registered this week. And so it's gotten a lot more reach and provide accessibility given the virtual nature of this conference. So we've had a last minute switch up IOC Africa, although we're not physically in Africa. We tried to present or tried to organize most of the agenda around the Kenyan or Eastern Africa time zone. So I apologize for those of you in eastern parts of the world, East Asia, Australasia, where maybe the times stink. There's other times where it stinks for me. I'm on the west coast of North America. I got up at 4 this morning, and I know there's some times where it's not great for those in Europe, and I apologize for that. We have tried to move the sessions around. It's one of the reasons why we're recording everything. So I do invite you to come back and watch these later, share these with your colleagues when it's at a time that's more convenient for you. So we've got a hopefully, looks like, all right, I just got some confirmation that Dr. Zachary Zohu is going to be available and stepping in for Mika Odido, who was our other contact at IOC Africa. So we're sad that he's not able to join us, but looking forward to his stand-in, the vice chair of IOC Africa. The keynote talk then is from Evert Flier. He's the international coordinator for the Norwegian Hydrographic Authority and Hydrographic Service, and he's also the chair of the GEBCO Guiding Committee. So super excited to have Evert with us today. And I think, not 100% sure the order of events here, but Evert, I know you're ready. So I'm going to ask that you start us off, and then we'll switch over to Dr. Zachary Zohu, which will lead us to the bottom of the hour. And then I'll pick it back up again and transition to our next moderator, Aileen Bohan, who's going to introduce the next session. So I'll stop sharing. And Evert, if you can start, hopefully this works as smoothly as it did in our practice session, which was not very smoothly.
Thank you very much, Tim. Let's see if this works as it should. Looks good.
All good. All good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tim, for the introduction, and thank you to Map the Gaps and IOC Africa for virtually hosting this Map the Gaps Jebco Symposium. Welcome to everyone, especially to first attenders. And even though I would have liked to be able to have a physical symposium, we can now reach out, as Tim said, to many more people. I feel really privileged to be allowed to talk about something that I am passionate about to so many people, and that on my birthday. And for the vast majority of the world's population, the oceans are only what we can observe with our eyes from a beach, an airplane, a ship, or a TV or computer screen. And it's this endless, now I should see, yes, it works. It's this endless surface moved by wind, hiding everything underneath it. And most people also unaware of the fact that every other breath they take contains oxygen produced by the oceans. But every single drop of seawater is filled with a diversity of microorganisms that have greater genetic differences than those between mice and elephants. With all the research that has been done during the last centuries, we still know so little about life underneath the surface of the sea. Nor do we know for sure how deep and what shape the sea bottom has for about 80% of the world's oceans, seas, and coastal waters. And these two are related. Identifying and monitoring marine fauna and flora is done more effectively if we know the depth and shape of the sea floor. 1 month ago, world leaders gathered in Glasgow for the COP26 climate summit to address climate change. And it's the oceans with their moderating effect on temperature, capturing CO2, causing precipitation necessary for growing crops and providing drinking water that provide our planet with a livable environment. To better understand the effects of increased sea temperature, melting ice, changing sea currents on our climate, and subsequently mitigate the consequences, we need to improve our knowledge of our oceans. And to reverse the trend of the declining health of our oceans, we need to collect more data. The United Nations recognized that and established the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And one of the strategic goals of the program is to create a comprehensive map of the ocean seabed, directly in support of Jebco. A comprehensive map of the entire seabed, not just of our waters of national jurisdiction. Dr. Matthias Jonas, Secretary General of the International Hydrographic Organization, outlines the importance of the endeavor. Getting to know the ocean is the greatest mapping adventure of our times. Many underwater mountain ranges, volcanoes, canyons have yet to be discovered and mapped. At the end of the 19th century, interest in the natural world exploded with expeditions to the most remote parts of the world with the aim of identifying and classifying new plant and animal species, rocks and sediments, as well as gaining a better understanding of the processes that created them. With this increased interest arose the need to be able to better describe the seabed. And in 1899, a group of geologists and oceanographers under the leadership of Prince Albert of Monaco began preparations for the production of a global seabed chart series. 4 years later, in 1903, the Jebco program was born, the Global Ocean Stewardship Program for stimulating ocean mapping, for assembling the data, and for making this knowledge publicly available through a new global chart series. All hydrographic officers were asked to contribute depth data, and in 1905, the first Jebco chart series was produced, though with a very low quality and with a total number of depth soundings less than what a modern multi-beam echo sounder collects today in 1 second. Over the years, 4 more improved and updated paper map versions of Jebco followed until the first digital world map of the seabed was published as Jebco Digital Atlas in 1994. At the same time, several organizational changes were implemented. In 1929, a then relatively newly formed International Hydrographic Organization took over responsibility for Jebco. And then in 1974, Jebco came under the joint leadership of IHO and the UNESCO Intergovernmental Oceanographic Committee. This joint parenthood provides us a unique opportunity to work across sectors, from ocean mapping on the one hand to other marine sciences who need ocean mapping data on the other hand. The ocean covers a staggering 362 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface, where most of the animal and plant life, geology and terrain formation hide beneath the ocean surface. Where land masses globally have an average altitude of 800 meters, the world's oceans have an average depth of 3.7 kilometers. Where all land areas have been meticulously observed and mapped to great detail, most of the oceans have not. For most coastal states, the mapping of national water is a complex, time-consuming, and costly activity. Yet, several international socioeconomic studies have calculated that it is profitable to conduct seabed mapping and to make that knowledge publicly available, with return on investment ratios in excess of 1 to 4. Perhaps data sharing need not be done in the greatest detail from a national defense or commercial perspective, but at least at a lower resolution. And in addition, access to this knowledge is now recognized as a prerequisite for sustainable development of sea and coastal areas. For 20 years, Norway has been running a national program for the collection of bathymetric, geological, and marine biological data in our EEZ as a vital knowledge foundation in support of sustainably managing our sea areas. In other words, providing the knowledge component for marine spatial planning. The European Union asked its coastal member states to commit to marine spatial planning through its directive on the same topic in 2014. And bathymetry is one of the 7 core datasets of EMODnet in support of that. Several other regions in the world cooperate regionally and establish marine spatial planning initiatives to sustainably manage our seas and coastal regions, such as the Baltic countries, Asian countries, and the Organization for Eastern Caribbean States. Schematic picture here is showing the different areas on land, coastal, offshore, and high seas, all connecting. Marine spatial planning is going global, and with that, the acknowledgement for the need to provide better fundamental knowledge about our oceans. And just a few weeks ago, at the COP26 Climate Summit, the high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy, co-chaired by the heads of state of Palau and Norway, called upon all coastal states to sign up and commit to sustainably manage all waters of national jurisdiction by 2030. The momentum is there, but let us not forget the high seas. What happens in the high seas will come to your EEZ. Recent years have seen increased ocean exploration, which has led to the discovery of previously untapped resources, new medicine, genomes, food, and energy resources. But if there is a wealth of natural resources that can be sourced from our oceans, how do we manage their use fairly and sustainably? Habitat mapping, analysis of seabed samples, and a host of other marine geospatial data sets can support this aim by building a full itinerary of our ocean resources and means of monitoring their use. Without this data, we risk depleting vital resources and causing irreversible damage to critical marine habitats. Communities around the world depend upon the existence of many vital marine environments, and both human and animal populations alike are threatened by their overexploitation. The 30x30 project aims to safeguard these environments by designating 30% of the world's ocean as marine protected areas by 2030. But to do so, there are formidable hurdles. Likewise, as offshore renewable energy becomes increasingly important, access and rights to parts of the ocean become fundamental to both conservation and economic efforts. One of the first steps in protecting a marine environment is to map it, so you know what to protect. It is this challenge of coordinating ocean mapping efforts and making global seabed knowledge available to the public that Jebco has been trying to address for almost 120 years. Despite increased involvement and contributions from a growing international network and technological advancements, progress has been modest. Therefore, it has been necessary to raise the level of ambition. In the race for outer space, President Kennedy did so when he told the world in his 1961 speech that the United States should have 1 person on the moon before the end of the 1960s. Mr. Sasakawa, chairman of the board of the Japanese charity organization, the Nippon Foundation, came up with a proposal in 2016 that is perhaps even more ambitious, to map 100% of the world's seabed by 2030. A year later, the Nippon Foundation Jebco Seabed 2030 project was established with that same ambition. The goal is for most of the world's oceans to be mapped by 2030 with a 400-meter grid, but with a higher resolution for the shallowest areas and lower resolution for the deepest areas. At the start of the project in 2017, the status was that we only had 6% completed mapping based on direct physical measurements. The rest of the Jebco map, which looks so nice when you zoom out, is based on satellite gravimetry and extrapolations. The extensive search for the black box of the disappeared Malaysian airline MH370 in the Indian Ocean in 2014 resulted in accurate mapping of more than 250,000 square kilometers. It also showed new seamounts, volcanoes, valleys, and other undersea terrain formations, in addition to actual depths being up to 1,500 meters deeper than previously assumed. The Nippon Foundation Jebco Seabed 2030 project, through its team with the 4 regional centers and their global center, is working hard to improve the Jebco grid and also to raise awareness of our lack of knowledge of the oceans in order to inspire to increase the pace of mapping. And it has been a highly successful project so far. We do not need to convince ourselves, though addressing national restrictions put on data sharing remains a challenge. But we do need help to convey our message outside of our community so that we can convince policymakers and politicians, philanthropic organizations and industry to do even more to map our planet in order to better understand her. The earlier mentioned UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is the UN program that aims to provide the knowledge to reverse the negative developments of declining ocean health. UN Decade is clear that one of the most important pillars of this knowledge is knowledge of the ocean's depth and terrain formations. This UN program has now formally endorsed Seabed 2030 as a strategically important activity. And Seabed 2030 gained further attention at COP26 Climate Summit, and the Paris Peace Forum has designated Seabed 2030 as one of the projects highlighted at its Congress earlier this month. 4 years after the start of the project, they increased data coverage by 15%, a fantastic result considering that it has taken 114 years to reach the 6%. However, of the 15%, 13% is provision of already existing data. Only 2% of the increase is based on new measurements, although the mapping activity is at a high level. With a 2% increase over 4 years, and with 80% remaining, it will take several generations before it is completed. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. New technology in the form of unmanned sailing drones has proven to be able to do the job at a potentially reduced cost in an environmentally friendly way. Earlier this year, a 22-meter-long unmanned sailing drone completed a successful maiden voyage from San Francisco to Hawaii. This sail drone surveyor has 2 multi-beam echo sounders on board that can map the seabed down to 7,000 meters. And in the course of 28 days, 22,000 square kilometers of seabed were mapped using wind and solar energy. In addition to seabed mapping, this technology can be used to collect other important data, such as seabed geology, water column data, fish stocks, meteorological data, and to monitor marine ecosystems. Another important initiative that contributes to improving seabed knowledge globally is the IHO Crowdsource Bathymetry initiative. Established as a working group in 2015 after a decision by the 5th Extraordinary International Hydrographic Conference, it provides guidelines on crowdsourced bathymetry, a practical how-to guide. But you first need to convince potential contributors to do so, and therefore a set of sector-specific information flyers is now produced and available on the IHO website. We have flyers for the cruise industry, fisheries, research vessel operators, commercial survey vessel companies, hydrographic offices, and marine navigation equipment manufacturers. Large survey and seismic companies such as Fugro and PGS are contributing with the data they collect and hopefully inspire others in their branch to do the same. Local and regional initiatives, such as the use of tourist diving vessels to map the Great Barrier Reef, are truly inspiring and will further add to this current momentum and focus on improving seabed knowledge. The global paucity of depth information is stifling the science we need for the ocean we want, and means that decision-making by governments and multilateral institutions are without the benefit and consideration of all the evidence required. It is now well accepted that bathymetric data is essential as a baseline for characterizing the ocean environment and its systems. But in addition to scientific and rational justifications, we can ask ourselves the following question. Do we not have an obligation to humanity complete the work of our more adventurous ancestors, such as Leif Erikson, Admiral Zheng He, Jean Barret, Jacques-Yves Cousteau, and many others, to discover the remaining part of our planet. After the Second World War, mankind's inquisitive nature and technological advancements shifted towards outer space. Did we turn our back on our planet? Currently, only 2% of the total budget spent globally on research is ocean-related. Getting governments, science, and industry to work together towards the goal of better knowledge of the ocean to complete the mapping of our planet is the main task of Jebco. Jebco is unique. It's the longest running global program of its kind, with its 120th year anniversary in less than 2 years. Please do me a favor, stop calling it the Jebco project. I mean, 120 years, 80% of the work left to be done. It's a program. It's one of the building blocks to improve ocean literacy, understanding how our oceans influence life on our planet, and vice versa, understanding how mankind influences the health of our oceans. Jebco invests in future oceanographers through the Jebco training program, funded by the Nippon Foundation. This highly successful training program is currently in its 18th year, having delivered over 100 students from more than 40 countries, where 90% of them are still working in the field of ocean mapping. The GEBCO Guiding Committee has decided to establish a new GEBCO subcommittee on education and training to coordinate more effectively with the current training program, but also to reach out to other ocean mapping programs so that Jebco has the interest of and can be managed by future generations as well. Jebco is supported by 2 parent organizations of all hydrographers and oceanographers and their member states, and their efforts accelerated by Seabed 2030. Jebco is the only publicly available authoritative gridded global bathymetric data set that is more and more widely used by a more diverse group of users. But most of all, Jebco is a network of voluntary, passionate, professional people, ocean scientists, hydrographers, and industry representatives working towards the same goal, to finish the last great mapping endeavor of our planet. So please continue to contribute, and for first attenders, please join. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Evert. That was fantastic. Appreciate your thoughts and inspiration, I think, for the vision for mapping the global oceans, and why events like these and others are so important to getting the word out, not just for enthusiasts and professionals, but also for policymakers and funders and governments, so they understand the importance, both at a regional and national and international level. So I'm going to turn it now quickly to Dr. Zachary Sohu from IOC Africa to just give a warm welcome from your region and your organization. If you're there, there you are, I think I see you.
I'm here.
Excellent. And now, do you have slides, or I was hoping just for a quick welcome, but I understand you may have a few slides.
Yeah, I have slides. Can I share it?
Yeah, I did want to say we've probably only got 5 minutes or so, but let's see how we go. And okay. Then and for those of you, oh great, and for those of you who are just tuning in, we're running a few minutes over time already. We're at the beginning of the conference, so that's not a good sign, but that's how these things go sometimes. So for our next session of presenters, just hold tight. The regional initiatives, regional mapping initiatives will get started in just a few minutes, and we'll be kicking it off with Aileen Bohan, who is the moderator of the session, and then the first guest is Fabian Cousteau.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm So Zachary from Benin Fishery and Oceanology Research Institute. I'm a focal point of IOC Africa in Benin. I want to address you in the name of Mika Odido, who is the chair of IOC Africa. IOC Africa make a reflection on opportunities and collaboration in data information and management in Africa. And we know that IOC Africa is an integral body of the UN system for ocean and science observation data exchange services and capacity development in the capacity development, and is involved a lot of countries. And we know that this organization of IOC Africa is, we can talk about IOC, and we know that in the central main activity is capacity development. In capacity development, we have capacity development to involve in all areas of the work. For example, in ocean research, observation data and management, and early warning and services, and assessment information and policy, and sustainable management and governance. And we know that work if IOC is sub-commission and the adjacent state, IOC Africa was established by 2011 as a framework to facilitate coordination among the member states in the region and to ensure the efficient implementation of IOC program in Africa. It's one of IOC 3 sub-commission. The over two cover the Western Park, West Park, and the Caribbean and adjacent region, Caribbean. And IOC Africa aims to promote scientific research and understanding of the ocean, coastal environment, and resources, and provide the science base necessary for development of a blue economy in Africa as outlined in the African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. The Agenda 2016 organized that Africa's blue economy should be a major contributor to continental transformation and growth, advancing knowledge on marine and aquatic biotechnology, the growth of an ocean-wide shipping industry, the development of sea, river, and lake transport and fishing, and exploration of beneficiary for deep sea mineral and other resources. The 2015 African Integrated Marine Strategy Plan of Africa, 2015, and the African Blue Economy Strategy provide a roadmap for harnesses of the region blue economy potential in sustainable way. The African Union has also declared the period 2015-2025 as the decade of Africa, sea and ocean, and the 25 July as the African Day of Sea and Ocean. All this action pointed to a continent determined to increase awareness in its ocean and resources and harness them a sustainable manner. Then we focus in observation or focus of Africa. You have ocean observation and data information management is oceanographic expedition and coastal observation platform, climate variability and climate change with forecast and extreme event, marine spatial planning, coastal marine and marine biodiversity, and ocean science and its application to management, modeling and forecasting of ocean state, assessment of marine and coastal ecosystem in Africa, vulnerability and adaptation of marine coastal ecosystem to climate change, harmful algae bloom, detection and earlier warning, ocean acidification observation and research, marine pollution survey and assessment. Capacity development for marine science and technology and ocean literacy include basic training in the ocean science, UNESCO chair in university research institution, development of a portal training opportunity, continuous professional development, focus working, regional training center, fellowship and ocean literacy, easy competition exhibition conference. I will in the next couple of slides focus on the few areas that are particularly relevant for discussion this week.
Now, Dr. Sohu, could I just interrupt for one minute? We have our next speaker is on a tight timeline. I'm wondering, do you have many more slides? Because what we could do is we could reconvene your talk after Fabian Cousteau. He's on a tight timeline.
Okay. I try. IOC Africa is working with several institutions and organizations in the region to develop digital postal and marine atlases, improve access to data online, and also the capacity to process and analyze the data. This includes sourcing, collecting, and formatting marine geospatial data and making them available to marine scientists and managers while building capacity for marine data management. IOC Africa is also contributing to the development of an ocean data and information hub that will ensure interoperability between existing information systems, improve the flow of information to end user, initial data tip to be provided to the hub, including people, institutions, organization, document and the best practice, spatial data, map, training opportunity. And again, we have IOC Africa has organized initiative for retrieving data set collecting in the region and available in data center outside the region and digitation data in paper and format. This danger of being lost. Other programs included the support for ocean data collection and strengthening of the regional ocean observation. I will now highlight some key issues that we plan to address during the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which run for 2001 and 2021-2030. The decade aims to provide the knowledge system needed for policy and action to achieve a global ocean supporting sustainable development by 2030 and beyond. 7 outcomes have been identified together with 10 related challenges that should be addressed in order to achieve the outcome. 5 recommendations were made during the regional consultation on the decade. We need to harness the demographic dividend by empowering the huge pool of youth population through focus ocean literacy program supporting skill development and national to enable them fight in the job marketing and creating new opportunity for employment. The need is to catalyze research in key ocean related fields in the link of the research result to societal application. The importance of improvement the quality and quantity of research outcome and using them to transform life through innovation and robust application of ocean science. Strengthening ocean research in the region through stronger integration of science, give investment in ocean observation system and improve science policy interface. And finally, establishment of university-based ocean innovation incubator hub to serve as a conduit to transform research results to action via technological development that is adapted to regional and local contexts and lead by African research.
So, Dr. Sohu, I'm going to have to, let's take a pause and we can come back and continue on after the first chat. Is that okay? Because we're really quite behind on our time here. So what I'm gonna ask is just take a pause, okay? If you don't mind stopping sharing, and then we're gonna carry on with Aileen, and then Aileen, just to switch up here, then we'll right after our first presenter in the next session, then we'll come back to Dr. Sohu and carry on, because I think we have some extra time. We did have one of our presenters drop out for the regional initiative session, so we should have extra time.
That sounds good.
Okay, I have just two slides to present, and I finish it.
I think our first presenter has to leave in 15 minutes, so I think we'll just give him a bit of time, and then we'll come back to you, Dr. Zachary, if that's all right.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay.
So welcome to the Map the Gap Symposium and to our first session on regional mapping initiatives. So we're going to go straight into a discussion with Tim Kearns and Fabian Cousteau, who we're very excited to have here today. And they're going to just chat about some of Fabian's mapping projects, which have been quite exciting. So Tim, do you want to take it away?
Yes. So Dr. Sohu, if you don't mind stopping sharing, are you able to do that? Excellent. Okay, great. We're back to the Brady Bunch view of Zoom. So please allow me, I'm just going to get right into it. Fabian Cousteau, many of you know him or know of him. You certainly know of his family's legacy. And so we sincerely welcome him here to Map the Gap Symposium. He is an aquanaut, an oceanographic explorer, an environmental advocate, and he's also founder of the Proteus Ocean Group and the Fabian Cousteau Ocean Learning Center, which is a nonprofit to help promote awareness and communicate the necessity of exploration and understanding of our underwater habitat. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I really want to get into the conversation that we're going to have with Fabian. But before I do that, I do have a short video that I'm going to play for you, and hopefully it'll work out okay. Just while I'm getting that set up, I think I mentioned, and just in case you're not familiar with Fabian Cousteau, so his father was Jacques-Yves Cousteau, who was a famed oceanographer and was mentioned by Evert in his talk earlier today. Fabian spent some time in his youth on his grandfather's vessel, Calypso and Alcyone, and he learned to scuba dive at a very young age. I think younger than my kids. He at only 4 years old or something. So he's got a lot of passions, but one of those is exploring and making discoveries below the sea. And just 6 or 7 years ago, I think it was mission number 31, his team of aquanauts lived underwater for 31 days, which was, marking a huge milestone for humans under the sea. And that has led to the development of this concept of Proteus, which is unmanned habitat, or sorry, a human-filled habitat under the sea. Let's just play this short video. That's going to require me to share my screen again. And then we'll get straight into the conversation.
What if we built the International Space Station of the Sea and were able to offer it to science, to education, and to outreach? That's how Proteus was born.
Be a sense of the science and the achievement when you're
I truly believe by building the most advanced research station based at the bottom of the sea, it can offer the world some invaluable insight from hydrocarbon pollution and microplastics, to biodiversity, to biomechanics. It really is the missing tool in the toolbox of ocean exploration. We have some amazing partners to help us map not only the Proteus site, but also the entire marine park. We have Carmabi, who are the local NGO here who are taking care of the marine park.
Project Proteus is, I think, for Curacao, very important because it's unique in the world. It's unique in the world. I mean, as simple as that. And that's the type of project we need on Curacao.
There's Map the Gaps.
For us, it's a great opportunity to not just collaborate with leading scientists and explorers, but also give back some knowledge of the seafloor to the people of Curacao.
And we have R2 Sonic with their technology who are helping us get a better understanding of the bottom and have a comprehensive map for ourselves and for the people of Curacao.
It's about building networks and building connections and increasing our knowledge of the oceans, and we're happy to contribute to that.
We're going into a place that is largely unknown. So the opportunities there are so deep, so wide. What will we stand to lose by not knowing more about the ocean world?
All right, great teaser video of what's to come in the future. And so Fabian, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be with you. I wanted to say two things. One, happy birthday to Evert, and two, to apologize to Dr. So for having to temporarily jump in there. Unfortunately, I have about 900 students waiting for me, so we're unfortunately not flexible on time on this end, and I apologize for that. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate being part of this.
Great. We're happy that you're here. This is important for your students, and it's important for us. So we appreciate it. So thanks very much. So this session, for those in the audience, that we're going to have just an interactive discussion. Our time with Fabian is short, so I'm just going to ask a few questions. And if you've got some direct questions, by all means, please pop them in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to surface them and add them to the discussion. So we've all seen the video on Proteus, and there's been some good press on it as well. Why was this mapping initiative that you've recently done, and I think we've worked together on, why is that important, and why is it a crucial step for your development in building this underwater habitat?
Well, in general, for ocean exploration, I think everyone on this symposium knows that it's vitally important to be able to start with knowing what's at the bottom of the sea and just getting a better sense of the topography and what the potential opportunities are, as well as having a vital tool for conservation. For us specifically, we're very thankful for working in tandem and in partnership with Map the Gaps and R2 Sonic and Carmabi and many others who made it possible to map the entirety of the marine protected area on the island of Curacao. And that gives us a tool and the ability to share the information with all sorts of entities, including the managers of the marine protected area. So they have a baseline to start with, and quite a detailed baseline at that. As up until then, there was a lot of supposition. There were a lot of ideas of what the bottom was, but the reality is they didn't really, and most people didn't really have an understanding of what the marine protected area was like and what to offer. Additionally, for us specifically, it gives us a starting point for our feasibility study that plays heavily into the installation of Proteus. Proteus being the International Space Station, underwater space station of the sea. And we need to have that kind of information to be able to best strategize where to put Proteus, because it does have a fairly large footprint, so to speak, and how to best mitigate any kind of environmental impact. So there are a lot of reasons for the map, and of course for the greater good of the people of Curacao, It gives us a tool to better manage, for example, tourism and diving. It gives us a better understanding of how to manage other resources and how fragile the ecosystem is in that area. The list goes on and on and on, including, of course, hopefully being a small part of the 2030 goals.
Fantastic. And part of the mission of Proteus, you've told me before, is to ensure equity and inclusion in your missions. Now, part of Map the Gaps, the nonprofit that we're running, is also about promoting equity and diversity and inclusion in ocean mapping. So did that factor in at all? And how do you see that in mapping and the mission for Proteus going forward?
No, that's an easy question to answer, Tim, and a great one. I grew up within a family that in any endeavor that we engage in, there needs to be a give back to society, including Proteus, which is a social good enterprise. And even though it's technically a for-profit enterprise, there's a heavy component of community outreach and benefit to anything that we do within that project, and of course beyond, including partnerships. So whether it's a for-profit or nonprofits, it's highly important, at least for me, philosophically, and the people we work with, that there be a component that plays into an investment into our future.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit more then about the inspiration behind Proteus. I mean, it's a pretty big deal to build a human habitat underwater. So
it's a bit unique. I feel it's the missing tool in the toolbox of ocean exploration. We have some fantastic tools, and of course we could always stand to use more because of the vastness of the ocean, 3.4 billion cubic kilometers of volume, and so on and so forth. But the idea of a habitat gives us a residence from which to study the regional area for extended periods of time. My grandparents, my grandfather specifically with his team, built the first underwater habitats, followed, of course, very closely by the US and others. And the understanding that scientists and researchers and engineers can leverage the coefficient of time that only a habitat gives you at the final frontier on the planet is, as a human being, as a human technological interface, is very unique and wonderful. We were able to do over 3 years worth of science in 31 days from the last undersea habitat or research station called Aquarius. Aquarius is 32 years old. You can imagine how antiquated the technology is there, and how, despite the fact that it's kept in fairly good shape, it's time for something much larger, much more comprehensive, much more modern, and future-looking. So future-looking, future-proof. And so building the International Space Station of the Sea, or a network of them, is logical, so that we can gather all sorts of regional data 24/7 to be able to feed that to those entities who could stand to use it, but also to learn more about one of these regions of the Caribbean that we know so very little about, whether it's for biochemistry or bioengineering, or as a training ground for astronauts who want to colonize other planets. There's a myriad of reasons why an underwater space station is useful.
Well, you've touched on some historical touch points. One was your grandparents' first underwater habitat, and then you said about Aquarius, 32 years old. So, I remember even as a boy watching your grandfather's shows on TV and stuff. But my question: you've spent you're almost your whole life dedicated and has been devoted to the ocean. So, what changes have you personally seen then? Like, what if you had to say, what's the state of the ocean now versus 20 years ago, 40 years ago? How would you characterize that?
Yeah, I would say anyone who's peeked under the blue veneer some decades ago, and you're aging me here, Tim. But you know, I've been diving, as you mentioned earlier, from the ripe old age of 4. I've been on expeditions routinely since I was 7, and working from the bottom up, quite literally, scrubbing the barnacles on the hull and all that gives you an appreciation for the ocean, its majesty, its fragility, its unforgiving nature, all those things that are the underpinnings of why we exist. No ocean, no life, right? And so for me, having had such a unique experience, educational experience growing up, it's important to try and share that knowledge with people, young and young at heart, who need to be part of the decision-making process so that we can steer ourselves to a better path. Because at the end of the day, it's not about saving the ocean or saving the planet, it's about saving our own species and looking forward to investing in our natural resource bank account so that we can give back to our future generations what we've taken for granted.
Yeah, that's great that you mentioned investment, because it's a similar challenge on the mapping side. Is just having that investment, and Evert talked about that in his keynote as well.
I keep saying investment instead of cost, because people all too often think of donations to nonprofits or support to nonprofits or paying for damages done and repairing damages done or what have you in the natural world as a cost. That cost was only incurred because we've been living on credit. So by being able to invest in our future, we quite literally are standing to gain a multitude of things, including on the basis of ocean exploration and conservation. Because at the end of the day, our life support system needs to be shepherded, and we must live in symbiotic relationship with it if we are to look forward to a better future. And mapping the bottom of the ocean is one of the baseline ways to better understand what the circulatory system of the planet is all about and how we can best protect it.
Right. A friend of mine told me once that bathymetry is the foundational data set from which all other data sets are come from. So we've looked at a historical perspective. National Geographic published in their periodic last year, they had 2 covers. On one side, it was the future of planet Earth in 70 years, and it was quite doomsday. And then on the other side, it was how we saved the planet in 70 years. What's your vision if you had a crystal ball? What does the state of the ocean look like in perhaps 70 years? What's the future look like?
Well, things have changed quite drastically just in my lifetime, much less in 3 lifetimes of ocean exploration in our family. So we're certainly headed in a doomsday type of path if we choose to ignore science, if we choose to ignore knowledge and better understanding of our ocean. But I'm a believer in human beings. I'm a believer that our tool, our most valuable tool of hope, of instilling passion and understanding and caring and loving of our aquatic planet is fundamental to all of our decision making, whether we're scientists or not. And at the end of the day, all of this would be for naught. And if I didn't have hope, certainly would rather be sipping an umbrella drink on some beautiful tropical island till the end of time. But I do see signs of progress by people who are motivated, who are connected with the ocean, the way I guess my grandfather best summarized it, which is people protect what they love what they understand, and they understand what they're taught. With that information, with that knowledge, that education, global education, we certainly can move the needle in a much more positive way and get us out of this tailspin that we're in.
Mm-hmm. So let's fast forward 5 years, 10 years maybe. Proteus is built and it's resting in the waters of Curacao. What's next? Are there more Proteus? You know, does it stop? Does it stop with one underwater habitat?
2025, end of 2025, we should be installing Proteus in the marine protected area of Curacao. So, you know, we're already planning for the next steps. And that includes a network of underwater habitats of various forms, shapes, and goals, depending on the locations. So they'll be tailored to those specific locations. But the idea is to have a network of stations that will complement all the work that's being done on the surface from surface vessels, as well as AUVs, ROVs, and all the intrepid folks who work tirelessly day in and day out to learn more about our ocean world. So Proteus was just the first step in a much longer mission to have a better finger on the pulse of the health of our ocean.
Well, final question before we go, and we mentioned earlier, and you told us how important diversity and equity was to you and your family, as it is to this event and Map the Gaps and many others. Global ocean mapping is only going to happen if people are able to do it in their own backyard, in their nearshore zone, in their economic exclusivity zone, in their region. I don't think anyone's going to come up and give us $3 billion and say, okay, we're going to go map the oceans now. I don't think that's how it's going to go. So what's a parting message that you would have for, this is a global conference. We've got people from all over attending, and we'll watch this later. So what's your message to them to help explore the underwater environment?
Well, you hit a very important topic, nail right on the head, so to speak, with the fact that we're the stepchild of funding oceanic research. I think we all know this, and by being able to pool our resources, there's nothing that we can't do. Leveraging each other's strengths and filling in the voids where we can by creating these strong partnerships. One of the things that happened in Curacao, which was fantastic, is being able to take a young student or young professional from, say, for example, Colombia, another one from Jamaica, putting them on a boat with some professionals from R2 Sonic and Map the Gaps, and being able to map that marine protected area and pooling those resources together and having those talents intertwined, we're able to do something that otherwise would simply not be economically feasible. So by being able to do that, we all stand to gain from it, of course, as a global community, and for the greater good, of course, of decision making in the future. So it's absolutely feasible, it's desirable, and it's something that we need to do as a network of oceanic researchers.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I think the more we can empower people, the more powerful we are. Well, thank you, Fabian. I sincerely appreciate you making time for us this week, and I wish you all the best. I hope the 900 students are easy on you. I
don't know. We'll have to see.
But I
thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah, and we look forward to having you as part of this community, and thank you for your interest and your willingness to participate today. So good luck with Proteus, and good luck with the rest of your day. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
I wish you all the best for your symposium. Thank you all very much for sharing your invaluable time with me, and look forward to doing many more down the future in the future.
Great.
Merci. Merci à tous. Au revoir.
Au revoir. All right, Aileen, we'll turn it back over to you, and I think we can continue on with Dr. Sohu if you're queued up.
Thanks, Jim. Dr. Sohu, are you happy to start sharing your screen? We're so sorry about that interruption. Are you happy to share your screen and return?
Nothing yet?
Not quite. All is good. After Dr. Zohu, we're going to continue on with our regional mapping sessions, and we'll have David Sanwell talking about the SMRT. We'll then have Tommy Fury, one of my own managers, talking about Atlantic projects, mapping projects, so Mission Atlantic. And then we'll finish off with Hans van Summeren, apologies Hans, discussing the Great Lakes project, of which Tim is involved. So it'll be an exciting little session. And of course, we're sorry about the time difficulties, everyone.
Have we lost Dr. Sohu? Are we still, we're just trying to get the screen share going, I think, here.
Dr. Zohu?
Might have to carry on.
Okay, so will we
We
continue
could
on?
also come back at the end of the session.
Okay, so we'll do a rejig. So we're going to continue on, and David, if that's okay with you, are you happy to jump into it?
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Beautiful.
Keep us on
Thanks so
schedule.
much.
Great.
Hey. Okay, I'll hand it over to you.
Let me share my screen. Okay, well, I'm Dave Sandwell. I'm a professor at Scripps Oceanography, and I'm here to talk about the base layer for the Jebco grid. And base layer is basically everything that isn't covered by regional people. So hopefully the base layer will go away eventually, but it's a way to get started. Here are some of the people I've worked with over the past few years, but over the tens of years, there's been many, many students editing seafloor data, working on this, and trying to build up this archive of data. Okay, so here's an outline of the talk. What is the base layer? Well, it consists of single beam and multi-beam sonar data, as well as predicted depth from gravity. That's to cover the 80% that we don't have from the multi-beam sonar. I'll talk a little bit about what we added recently, 900 cruises from the NCEI, and then 9 regional grids from IFRAMER, really wonderful data set. A little bit about how you might use this base layer to target your seafloor mapping out in the deep ocean, especially, and I'll talk about MonkGeo, which is a really successful example. And then a little bit about editing. The base layer has lots of flaws and it needs to be edited, and we hope people can go in there and highlight things that are bad. And then a little bit about how you would update this base layer with your best data and trying to maintain the masks. It's really helpful to know exactly where we have measurements and where we don't. Okay, so here's a review. You've all seen this kind of thing. Really the way we would like to map the seafloor is to use multi-beam sonar. A ship can map an area about 2 or 3 times the ocean depth. But so far we've only mapped about 20% of the seafloor at this high resolution. You can do better than 300 meters. I think the Jebco objective in the deep ocean is about 400 meters. And of course, in the shallow regions, you can do much, much better than that. So this is what we would like to do. But we have these gaps. We have 80% gaps. And if you go to the southern hemisphere, the gaps are pretty extreme. There are regions the size of the state of Florida. If you're familiar with the state of Florida, I know a lot of you are out, in other countries, but there are these large regions that haven't been mapped, and the question is how will we fill these gaps in before 2030? And I noted from Everett's talk that he's saying we're going to have to continue this effort for probably a decade to fill in everything. But one way to do this at a very low resolution is to use satellite altimetry. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but basically it's a satellite that orbits the Earth, measures the topography of the ocean surface. And the ocean surface is an equipotential surface of gravity we can then use that to infer what's on the seafloor. But the problem is we only get a very blurry picture of what's going on. The resolution of this technique is about equal to the water depth, say 4 kilometers. So we're never going to do 400 meters like we'd like to with multi-beam sonar. The diagram on the right just shows what happens if you had 2 seamounts spaced at 4 kilometers and you observe the gravity field at different elevations above the seafloor, say 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers, but the average ocean depth is about 4. So they blur into one feature. So this is the problem with satellite altimetry, yet it gives us a reconnaissance view of the ocean that we can then use to target things with ships. How do we combine these two? I won't go into the details, but basically we take whatever ship soundings we have and use that to construct the long wavelength shape of the oceans using Jebco data, all kinds of data to do this. And then we take the gravity information from the altimetry, and there's lots of new altimeters now that are providing really spectacular gravity. We take that and use that in a certain wavelength band between about 160 kilometers and 12 kilometer wavelengths to predict the bathymetry in that band, and then we add the two together and create this predicted depth that forms this base layer for the Jebco. So a little bit more about gravity. The nice thing about altimeters is they can measure gravity anywhere on the oceans up to 80 degrees north, even higher with cryosep, but we only go to 80 degrees north and south. And there's 2 ways to look at this. We can look at the gravity anomaly, which is variations in the pull of gravity. It's usually 9.8 meters per second squared, but these are the variations. They're very small, about 10 to the minus 6 of G. And then on the right-hand side is the curvature of the sea surface. This is the vertical gravity gradient. It's something that you can measure now with the new altimeters, cryosat, and so on. And this is giving us a much more detailed picture of the seafloor, although, as I said earlier, it's still blurred by the upward continuation from the seafloor. So let's look at an example. Here's a place in the Pacific. We're going to look at the vertical gravity gradient. Here's a place in the Pacific where there's a lot of seamounts. These little white blobs here are seamounts. They're blurred out seamounts. You can see the scale down here is 100 kilometers. And so this is giving us an indication of what's on the seafloor in that area. If we look at the actual depths, this is that 20% coverage, pretty typical. This is in the Central Pacific, and we can see lots of seamounts where we have good multi-beam and single beam coverage, but where we don't, there's a void. And of course, this is the map the gaps, is to try to fill all those voids. But from the vertical gravity gradient, we can say, oh yeah, there's a seamount in that void that we haven't mapped. I should have clicked on a different one. There's one there, and it's in the gap. So we can then use that information to predict the depth or to then target our surveys in the future. We may not be able to map everything, but maybe if we hit the highlights, we'll be doing a lot better. So here's the base layer for the Jebco grid, and it consists of real measurements of multi-beam data, and then this blurry predicted depth that we're trying to improve with the satellite gravity. And lately we've been trying to sharpen these seamounts. I won't have time to talk about this, but we know where the seamounts are, and we know approximately the shapes of the seamounts from high resolution multi-beam surveys. So we're trying to sharpen them up a little bit. But again, they're not really mapped by this technology. It's more predicted. Okay, so a little bit more about the base layer. We've added a lot of cruises from, these are stored in the IHODB, I guess, the NOAA archive where we got these, and we've gone through and edited the data. That's actually the biggest issue here, is to remove soundings that are erroneous or in the wrong location, all kinds of problems. This takes a lot of time, and I think this is where the regional centers are probably doing a better job and can overprint what we do with their improved data. So these are the new multi-beam. Here's some grids that Ifremer provided that are really wonderful. These are composite grids of remote areas. For example, Reunion Island here and the surrounding area is a fantastic grid. And this is getting into the base layer of Jebco, and I assume this will also be overprinted by the regional grids. So how would we use these predicted depths? Here's one way of using the data. We take our satellite gravity map of, this is an area in the Central Pacific where we don't have any multi-beam coverage, and we can use that to predict the seafloor depth. Again, it's very blurry here, but it tells you that there's a giant seamount here. It's 3,500 meters tall, uncharted, 3,500 meters tall. That's amazing to me in this day and age, but they're out there. And so we can use the gravity to predict that depth, and then we can design a ship survey to go and collect real data. And that's what it looks like over here on the right. You see the much higher resolution. It's got a flat top here, so it's a GEO. And this was named in honor of Walter Munk, who was sort of the grandfather of our lab. And I think Jebco approved the name about 6 or 9 months ago. So how can other people help? Well, when we create this base layer, it has flaws. It has lots of flaws, and some of them are worse than others, and you sort of have to accept some issues. But here's an example. This is some area in this Indian Ocean, pretty well mapped, and you can see this funny discontinuity between the multi-beam data and the predicted depth. And this is actually due to the outer beams of the multi-beam are coming up a little bit. And so we'd like to remove those outer beams. And one way to do it is to simply draw a polygon around what you don't like. And in Google Earth, you can get a KMZ file here that's exactly this. Go in there, draw a polygon, send it to us. There's also a site at New Hampshire that also you can do the editing. But this is very helpful because it's all a matter of taste. Do you accept that problem or not? And it depends on the application. Okay, there's another thing, and I won't dwell on this. Just if you do have that base layer and you have some better data that you would like to overprint on that base layer, there's a really good way to do this without getting discontinuities in the edges using generic mapping tools. And it's basically a remove, regrid, restore. One of the key things that needs to be done is if there are large areas that don't have new data, you need to control the spline fitting in those areas with zeros. And I could send people examples, but this is really critical. So you basically have a grid that matches your data exactly, and then it blends smoothly into the predicted depth without discontinuities. So in summary here, we're providing this base layer to Jebco. I think we're trying to do it on a yearly basis, and Pauline Witherall has been working with us closely to edit the data especially. And thank you, Pauline. You can remove bad soundings if you send polygons. I think the regional centers could look at this and say, ooh, that's terrible there. Got to get rid of that. And we'd be happy to remove that. We add new data as it becomes available. We improve the gravity prediction. And most of the work is done in editing the soundings. It's just a big job that I think we're all dealing with. And finally, that GMT can be used to upgrade your grid so there's no sharp transition between the new depths and the predicted depths. Okay, well, thanks for having me. I'll take questions, or I can look in the chat and answer questions there.
Thanks so much, David. That was fantastic. And just to note that all these everything will be available, the recordings will be available. So if anyone wants to have another look over how they can edit some of the soundings and help improve and work on the base grid, that information will be available about an hour after this goes. And there's a few comments just saying great work from David and the team. David, that was
Thanks
really
for having
interesting.
me.
That was fantastic.
Thanks.
I look forward to killing some dots or looking for, I do
Yeah.
enjoy looking for motion problems in those.
Oh, they have smiles and frowns everywhere. There's problems everywhere. So
Oh, fantastic.
please send your edits.
Happily. I'll wait for the next lockdown. So thanks so much for that, David. If there's any more questions, we'll send them on to David and we can, we'll discuss them afterwards. But I think now we're going to go on to Tommy is going to chat about Atlantic mapping projects. Tommy is the joint manager at Infomar, the Irish National Seabed Survey. But today he'll be talking, I think, more about just Atlantic mapping, regional mapping programs. So I'll hand it over to Tommy.
Thanks very much, Aileen. For some reason, you're not seeing my PowerPoint, I don't think, are you?
No, not yet. Oh.
Let me try that again.
Yeah, sounds good.
Ah, okay. I think it's appearing. Is it there now?
Yeah, it's in notes mode now.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully that's it. Are you seeing full screen now?
Perfect, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So look, thanks very much for the opportunity to present here today at this regional mapping initiatives, and I was fascinated to hear David's talk there. You may not recall, David, but you provided us with some data in relation to a slide I'll show shortly some years back. So I'm quite fascinated in the detail that we can derive from the satellite altimetry data. So I guess I'm coming at this from an Irish perspective, and hopefully I can relay some information that's relevant to the challenge of mapping the gaps. I'm involved in the National Seabed Mapping Programme, Infomar, as is Aileen, and it's a joint initiative funded by our Government of Ireland, by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and it's jointly managed by two organisations, the Marine Institute and the Geological Survey. So this is the footprint that we have on the globe to deal with, and we've been out there mapping with multibeam survey for many, many years now, and geophysical and oceanographic data as well. And I guess for our sins, we've sort of got involved and are delighted to be involved in the wider conversation, and hopefully can transfer some knowledge into the challenge ahead, which is to fill the gaps. And I'm, I guess, directly involved in the kind of Atlantic conversation, and Aileen is involved through Jebco in the global challenge. So just to kind of give a little bit of perspective on where I'm coming from, I guess I am the EU co-chair of the Atlantic Seabed Mapping International Working Group. I'll explain a little bit what that is later. I am the Seabed Mapping Work Package co-lead on a European Horizon 2020 funded project called Mission Atlantic. And the day job is the joint program manager for Infomar, which I've mentioned already. We've been involved in seabed mapping since 99. I started myself in 2000, and there was some preceding work done from 97 to 99 by our Petroleum Affairs Division. But the two programs that we're really focused on are the Irish National Seabed Survey and Infomar, its successor, which is from 2006 to 2026. So it finishes end of 2026. I was involved in the workshop which preceded the Galway Statement, which was a declaration of intent signed in 2013 by Europe, Canada, US to collaborate on Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. It followed with a Dublin Castle seabed mapping focused workshop in December 2014, which led to the setup of this Atlantic mapping group I mentioned already in Brussels in February 2015. And we had a follow-up meeting in Cork in Ireland in 2015, and a month later set out to do the first joint US, Canada, Europe Atlantic transit under this agreement to collaborate. And that was where I got in contact with David to ask, was there any features along this route? We had a direct transit between Newfoundland and Ireland, where the ship was being chartered by Memorial University, and it was returning 4 weeks after our meeting in Cork. And we set about putting somebody from US, Canada and Europe on the ship with about 3.5 weeks notice, and successfully did that and did a lot of public relations and communications around it. And it led to many, many more similar initiatives. Our first remote one having been taken place in 2017. In 2016, I was moderating the panel 2 session at the Forum for the Future of Ocean Floor Mapping in the context of the coastal perspective, which contributed in part to the roadmap, the Nippon Foundation Jebco Seabed 2030 roadmap for future ocean floor mapping. Subsequent to that, in 2017, in Norway, under the Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance, we had a seabed mapping workshop, which resulted in my involvement with the Mission Atlantic project, which was a proposal at that time, and there was some sidebar conversations which led to our involvement in that project. And subsequently, before we closed out the Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance coordinating support action, which Marine Institute led, we published this small brochure, the Atlantic Seabed Mapping Roadmap. And I'm glad to see some names on the call who've been involved in the discussions of that group over the years that led to that short little brochure to sort of highlight some of the discussions and where we got to. So in terms of how we might sort of approach a large-scale program, the image on the left shows you the area that we have multi-beam surveyed to date, with the hatched areas in the bottom of the image in different colors relating to offshore areas mapped by the bigger vessels, and the coastal pink colored area on the southwest of Ireland being that done by the inshore fleet managed and run by the Geological Survey. And Aileen spends a lot of time out in those vessels in fairly treacherous coastal and weather conditions with the mapping team. On the right there, you see an image which was developed back in 2018 when we tried to do a forecast as to how much survey effort and annual mapping coverage we would have to achieve to complete this baseline multi-beam bathymetric survey by the end of 2026. We didn't want to have to go back to government and be 10% shy of completing this. So the focus is really on the baseline bathymetric data at the sacrifice of the likes of some of the quality sub-bottom profile geophysical data sets, which simply can't be acquired at the resolution you might do for a site survey at the vessel speed we undertake multi-beam mapping. We developed at the time in 2018 the concept of the Infomar Survey Unit. And that was, I guess, our lords and masters, our corporate governance folk found it difficult to track what we were doing in terms of square kilometer coverage achieved. So we broke it down into these units. We had 55,000 square kilometers to map at that time, approximately. And each of these units is 1,000 square kilometers. So it was that metric. There's 56 to do, and how many do we have to do this year to get to the end goal of completing it? So it really was about simplifying the sort of tracking process. The image on the bottom left is just a view of our bathymetric data viewer. If you go to infomar.ie and you go into our map viewers, you can drill right into the data and change the color range on this to see the features and bring out the topography. This is just a table. Every year we set out to present the target coverage by vessel survey that we're going to do in the year. And this year we aimed for a 5,221 square kilometer shelf mapping, offshore shelf mapping target. And we then come back at the end of the year and we assess what we've actually done by survey leg. And in this case, we achieved 6,150. That's 5.2 target, 6.2 Infomar survey units delivered. And that's the approach that we take, and this is reported on routinely to our program boards and to our heads of organizations into the metrics to establish whether we're actually on target to complete. This is where we are towards the facing into next year. And again, the area in blue on the left image is our kind of blocks of survey coverage yet to do. The white area here to the west coast of Ireland and coastally are the inshore fleet targets. I don't have the metrics here just for both, it would just be too complex, but just to give you the concept of how we operate. The deeper blue the deeper blue color is actually deeper water closer to the shelf edge. So we know we'll map that faster. Coverage will be increased as we move west. And you'll see as we go into the final years of the program, the coverage figures and targets are higher. The challenges ahead, one of the key things that's going to happen next year is we'll have the arrival of the new vessel, Tom Crean. She arrives mid-year next year. She'll be fitted with 2 multi-beam systems on board already, a dual head 2040 on a retraction unit and on a single head on a drop keel. We have fitted her to take a 712 and various other instrumentation has already been commissioned. She just was launched about a week and a half ago. So there's lots of social media footage of that happening. But she's a 52-meter vessel, which will, and she's been designed, I guess, with all sorts of fuel efficiency processes and latest technologies in place to ensure that the operational work we do in the coming years is based on a state-of-the-art scientific research vessel. This image is just to sort of hone in on some of the data and products and some of the recent activity in this space. This graphic is something that was a result, I guess, of Aileen's time in New Hampshire, becoming a Jebco scholar. So it's a CCOM GSI collaboration where some of the code to develop these types of composite charts was taken. And we developed a web map service where we can click into our track lines and it will automatically generate the composite chart for the area in question. And so we've built little YouTube snippets and how-to guides to show how that works, and they're on our website. We've done a lot of work in seabed classification, and again, this is largely resourced by EMODNet. We're involved in various different strands of EMODNet, but this is the seabed habitats, where we're basically analyzing the acoustic data and ground truthing to derive these seabed classification maps. Each of these dots on the map is a cluster of samples. If you zoom into the cluster and click on an individual sample, it'll show you a sample image and metadata for that physical location. And we're developing a solution for high-def video as well on the back of a large-scale reef habitat assessment we did in recent years, where we spent 3 years doing fieldwork on using our Holland 1 offshore ROV, and I've mapped some spectacular habitats offshore. And we're now trying to develop that technology to host and serve up that video data that we have access to now. We've done a lot of work recently in terms of data quality across the program. We've developed data processes and workflows. The Marine Institute are now accredited as a National Oceanographic Data Center by the International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange. And we're developing these processes in order to be able to deliver reproducible products and ensure the quality of the management approach we take to handling our data. As we move on through the program to the final years into N26, we're really looking at developing the legacy associated with this long-term government investment in mapping. We're really looking at industry needs in the coming sort of 12 months with a view to a 2023 full program review. We did a cost-benefit analysis back in 2008, where we looked at the benefit to the state of the investment, and Evert referred to a figure of sort of 4 times return on investment. And that's what we had as a minimum, 4 to 6 times. So we'll be looking at this kind of, what's the output and the value and the impact of this long-term activity being. And we're kind of making this transition from mapping to monitoring. We're looking at developing the infrastructure and adding to the infrastructure inventory we have in terms of latest technology for particularly in that white ribbon coastal zone, and starting to build in remote sensing activities, hyperspectral imaging, airborne activities, survey data. We are looking to leverage the knowledge that we've achieved through this and share it as best we can, which is why we've got involved in international programs and research and data initiatives. We have an international event in 21st of February coming, where we'll sort of be, I guess, showcasing what we're doing for a full day on the day preceding the Remote Hydrography Conference and Exhibition, which is scheduled to happen February 22 to 24 in Dublin Castle. All going well, that's an in-person event with the link to that there. There's a lot of people behind the scenes that have been out doing the dirty work, if you want to call it that, having fun, I would argue. I haven't been to sea for unfortunately many years due to the torturous role of administering and trying to deal with the finance and management of the program. In recent times, I mentioned Mission Atlantic. This is really about mapping to understand the future status of our Atlantic marine ecosystems under multiple stressors. And I co-lead a work package on benthic mapping, epicosystem resources and pressures. And there's a deliverable due in February coming, which is a framework for future Atlantic cooperation on seafloor mapping efforts and prioritization of seabed targets for integrated ecosystem assessment. Lots of complex words and language, but ultimately what we're trying to do, having been locked in a room with a group of oceanographers and climate scientists and modelers and ecosystem scientists, we want to evolve the roadmap that we did under AORA to develop a framework. And the image on the top right here is something that Andy and team did some work on, Andy Armstrong and NOAA/CCOM. And it's really looking at the survey effort to extend what we did in the North Atlantic by way of prioritization into the Southern Atlantic. So I guess it's a call for help and or relevant information. Feel free to drop information into the chat or email me directly on thomas.fury@marine.ie if you have information or knowledge that would really inform the why, the how, and the where we should go. Whether that's survey plans, protocols for operations to guide how we would approach this, tools or technologies to help us track the activities. And yeah, I'll come back to that a little bit more in a minute, but just to highlight this square, just to take a few of those tiles, that's 618 operational days to map that piece of seabed. And so if we're going to get somebody to invest in this initiative in the high seas where it's not within the remit of a national agency or government to do it, we really need to know why we're going to that area as opposed to another one. And we have to start looking at the prioritization process. So to wrap up, I mean, what does this Atlantic bathymetry and benthic habitat mapping framework look like? It has to address the why, and these are to some degree the chapters in what will be a short report as a deliverable to this mission, this Horizon 2020 project. The societal needs, the economic needs, and the policy requirements are the why. We've heard lots of discussion around this already this morning. The how we approach it, really we're looking at this need to really hone in on where the data gaps are and be able to almost see that live. So if somebody fills in a large area of mapping tomorrow, I need to be able to see that in case I'm out there in 3 months' time doing work, so that I don't overrun an area that's just been surveyed. I need to know the priorities, and I need to know who's interested in mapping what area first. So there has been surveys done. We haven't tracked them all down. So if people are aware of information or resources, please let me know. Pre-survey, we will have to address this concept of kind of pointing people to existing resources for operating procedures, for assessing the effort to go and map an area, how to get access to infrastructure and the funding to do this. And this is to help, the PI or the young kind of early career scientist community to start to get on board and support it. We want the roadmap to really show them that the sort of first point of entry in terms of tackling some of these issues. Tracking and reporting is something that we really need to be doing in some sort of standard way or approach, so that we're all sharing the same information and capturing the successes as a collaborative, which is why I've sort of put this phrase on top here that we need an Atlantic Mapping Alliance. So we have lots of different initiatives and activities all under their own umbrella with their own pressure to sort of create awareness around their project due to funding constraints, etc. But really, we have to come together as a community, as an alliance to do this activity, to drive it forward with a shared communication message. The challenge in terms of data will have to be kind of hooked into this report as well, into this framework. And this challenge of what constitutes mapped. In terms of bathymetry, that's a bit more straightforward, but how much benthic data do you need in a tile of seabed in an area, specific area, whether it's 400 by 400 kilometer sort of grid cells as we used in the North Atlantic for our pilot study, or a different sort of space. It depends on the location and the sensitivity. The owning versus the archiving of the data, not all regions have data centers that have been resourced to the level of, like we have in Europe and the States, of NCEI and EMODNet. So we have to look at how do we transition that knowledge and that architecture and that data stewardship into other regions globally. And in this case, I'm kind of referring to the Southern Atlantic. And then we have to start to develop the technologies, the processing and analytics, and the approaches to how we ensure that the data standards and quality are appropriate for this data to be used the way we want. We will have to address the money side of the house, the economics, the value of this. So if people are aware of cost-benefit analysis and reporting that's been done to support high seas mapping, we know in Ireland that we've made the right decision by putting this long-term investment into place in terms of delivering our EEZ mapping. But how do you make that economic argument in the high seas? So we have to look to find a way to get these types of economic assessments done, bringing into the fore the whole, the climate conversation, the carbon budget management conversation. We have to have the targets. If we don't know where we want to go first, how are we going to get anybody to justify funding us to do it? We really have to have a focused approach to this, and it will be multi-tiered. It will be industry, it will be government, it will be research, all trying to work together to fill different parts of the jigsaw. And we will have to look at the mapping versus research approach. So an operational mapping program is not the same as a research funded project. We want to do this systematically. It needs to be done in a way that the data are merged and that we minimize the artifacts and that the sort of issues that David just mentioned, that they're addressed and dealt with. So we have to fund operational mapping whilst directing the research to focus in on the areas and the ecosystems of importance to society. And in terms of the strategic planning, I mentioned this concept of an Atlantic Mapping Alliance. I don't know how that looks, but we'll try and tease it out a little bit to highlight the existing architecture that is there from the IHO, IOC, right across the board through the data and the bathymetry and the benthic space. The data has to inform policy and it has to inform governance. So there's this challenge to be addressed. And we have to, as was mentioned earlier, we have to leverage the technology and accelerate the deployment and development of technology to add to the data resources we acquire. So ancillary data are cheap to acquire if you put a piece of instrumentation on board whilst the platform is at sea. And that's key, whether it's an autonomous platform or whether it's a ship. Yeah, so we've got to really get clever. Capacity build and communication is something that's central to everything we have to do. We have to share the knowledge and we have to tell people about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And as I mentioned already, as I say, if anybody has specific resources or information that they want to bring to the fore that would contribute to this overall arching framework report, please let me know, pass it on through email or drop some references in the chat, and I'll try and capture that in the report. And that is the last slide. We look forward in the end of 2026 to be able to contribute our entire EEZ data set. Most of it's already in the Bathymetric data center already, but to fill the gaps and deliver the comprehensive all-island EEZ map. Thank you.
Awesome. That was lovely, Tommy. Thanks so much. And I think one of the things you really hit on was that one of the key things that we need, I think, for if we're going to map all the oceans, is some kind of app or way for if we're sending a research boat out to easily access where it can go that hasn't been mapped, what routes it can take. Yes, so that was fantastic. We have a question there. If you see, can you see that, Tommy? Possibly we could address that.
Just having a quick read there now, sorry.
No bother, I'll read it aloud as you're having a look. So the question, will this Atlantic bathymetric and benthic habitat mapping framework potentially go further into the hydrospatial domain to include even more integrated data in the water column, sub-bottom and coastal zones?
It's a short report which is intended to, I guess, inform the Commission who are funding this Mission Atlantic project, how they might address elements of the challenges we face to map the Atlantic. So acknowledging that the bathymetry and the benthic habitat are the sort of foundation layers, the report has, there's a limit to what we can get into a document, a 30-40 page document. So ideally, it's going to point to existing resources and methodologies and approaches. It will highlight the technical and innovation challenges we have. And that includes, exactly like you mentioned, a real-time view of the gap, insofar as that's feasible. And it will also highlight the research challenges. So the approach to knowing how much benthic data you need for ecosystem management it's an unknown, and so we have to evolve our knowledge, and the report it's probably not going to get into all of those specific line items, but we'll do our best.
Thanks, Tommy. And then I think we have one more question from David Sanwell, and then we are, I think, 10 minutes behind, so not too bad, and then we'll go on to Hans talking about the Great Lakes. David, do you have a question there?
Yeah, great talk, Tom, and I'm looking forward to this report. You brought up an example of an area in the South Atlantic that was really remote and is going to be the kind of most challenging thing. And from a research perspective, we can write a proposal to go to that place, but as you said, we need to have good rationale to go there, and then we'll probably only be able to survey a very small part of that. So how do we deal with it? Is this going to be a technology thing where we have to use, the sail drones or remote vehicles? I mean, how do you see this getting mapped eventually?
I don't even know where to start with how to answer that question, but you're 100% right, and that's the reason I put the box on that part of the Atlantic, is because it's remote and it's the people transit to go and do research in the Antarctic. Do they stop and undertake mapping along the way? Not necessarily. And I guess it's up to us as a community to communicate the need for a little bit of bathymetric mapping every time a ship that has a multibeam on it goes to sea. And whether that's transect or whether that's stopping and dedicating 10% of your ship time to doing one part of one of these, let's call it a tile, or until somebody comes up with a better name, a grid cell area of mapping. The challenge is going to be, it's going to be very difficult to get people on board. But if we have a general interest in doing Southern Atlantic mapping or going to the Antarctic, and if we present an approach where there's a tiled map, in the same way you were able to give me an indication that there might be a seamount somewhere based on a really loose data set. You gave me some really good ones that I'd love to have gone and mapped that were about a half a day offline, but we didn't have the time to break off the direct transect to from Newfoundland. So
guys, just we're moving a bit behind time, so I might ask the Perrys to take this offline, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I think you go on for a few hours. But I'm delighted. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there. Thanks. So we're going to go on to our final talk of the afternoon, and it's with Hans. He is the director of the Great Lakes Water Studies Institute at Michigan, and he's going to be talking a bit about that and Lake Bed 2030. So I'll hand it over to you, Hans. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, everybody. And It's great to be here to talk to this audience, and I do want to thank Tim for allowing me to share this perspective on the Great Lakes, something that he and I and so many others have been working so hard to promote and generate and move forward. So I'm excited to bring some of the updates to the group today. You know, in general, it's a lot of people and we need more. But when we look back at where we started, and we had significant conversations with our group from the Great Lakes Bottom Mapping Work Group, where multiple agencies and organizations were having these conversations 5, 6, 7 years ago about the need for a better understanding, how it's evolved from those conversations to a really documented approach towards let's get this done. And Lakebed 2030 is certainly a shared collaboration from so many different individuals, and the Great Lakes Observing System has been a huge part of that, Northwestern Michigan College, and many other organizations and societies. So it's really got some legs behind it, and we're excited about that. And why do we need it? You know, what is the rationale? And from the Great Lakes perspective, 5 U.S. Great Lakes, U.S. and Canadian Great Lakes, 40 million people drink this water. So you look at it, it's the largest readily available glass of fresh water in the world. So it's a significant amount of fresh water, a huge annual fisheries component, $7 billion. Maritime trade, most of the iron ore is mined or transmitted from Canada down through the Great Lakes into U.S. refineries. A $6 trillion GDP between the U.S. and Canada, 1.3 million jobs, over 7,000 kilometers of coastline. So a significant area to understand. And if we look at it from a timeline, we moved into the Lakebed acronym in 2019. I actually was at a talk at Underwater Intervention with Kelly Brumley, speaking towards Fugro's contribution. And afterwards, I spoke to her about the Great Lakes and the perspective of Seabed 2030. And of course, they were included, but they weren't highlighted. And the idea of how could we demonstrate a project at the time, and I'll use what was brought up earlier, that maybe it is now a program, but the idea of creating a synergistic approach towards mapping our Great Lakes. And so MTS sponsored a fall conference, a Tech Surge conference in fall of 19 that was in person. And we had significant interest from throughout the Great Lakes community and multiple sponsorships from around major organizations and societies. And so it was a great kickoff. And then as we all are dealing with, COVID came in and we had a couple of virtual conferences, but the attendance through those virtual conferences and the engagement across the US and Canadian border has only grown substantially to hundreds of people engaging and signing up for these webinars and conferences, and the engagement of multiple agencies has really moved forward. So it's an exciting time. Next fall, we have planned on a Lakebed 4 conference in Toronto, and that will be in person. And we're hopeful that that moves forward, but that will be an exciting movement forward of the needle in terms of now we're starting to cross the border and create this real comprehensive Great Lakes event. So we'll keep moving with the Lakebed 2030 conferences, but I do want to point out that we will in 2025 be hosting the Oceans Conference in the Great Lakes, which is a international conference by the Marine Technology Society and IEEE. And it's the first time it's ever been on a freshwater environment, but Lakebed and the initiatives that we're going are going to be a significant part of that conference. So good things happening, and we want to keep that needle moving. And so what are the Great Lakes priorities? And as with the ocean, the world ocean, we have to look at the same types of implications only at the Great Lakes scale. And we have numerous needs for understanding our lake floor for the betterment of so many different activities and modeling and scientific initiatives. So one thing that the Great Lakes have been experiencing over the last decade is significant water level fluctuation on the order of 2 meters from our low of just 7 or 8 years ago to our high of just last summer. And now we've dropped nearly 1 meter since that high of last July of 2020. So we're seeing very dramatic fluctuations which are impacting the nearshore environment. And that nearshore environment will have significant change out to depths greater than 15 or 20 meters. That is causing significant coastal erosion and infrastructure degradation, which is very expensive. So the understanding of that nearshore environment and the habitats that exist in there are absolutely critical for good management decisions as we move throughout the Great Lakes environment. Critical species, invasive species, all these interactions are occurring without a detailed understanding of the lake floor. And so, another perspective is the new blue economy, and really looking at how the initiatives of Seabed 2030, Lakebed 2030, these mapping initiatives, how they can really support that sustainable blue economy, and looking at it from a transformation towards innovative use of technology, and then the talent that is needed to drive that technology. And if we think about where we've been seeing the biggest improvements and initiatives with technology and mapping, we're seeing that these solutions are becoming more prevalent. And obviously to complete the global map, we're going to need more and more of these technologies to be developed. So there are poster images for just about every need out there. And so this is one from Lake Michigan. This is an image of deepwater sculpin, which is a prey fish that is significant to Great Lakes fisheries. But what's unique about this picture is that this is the only picture, the only documented picture ever taken of this 3-inch long bottom dwelling fish and a nest with eggs. And so this was done with a remotely operated vehicle. These fish typically spawn in the middle of winter. Usually there's ice cover. This year there was not, and we were able to dive the sub and get this image, but we couldn't have done it without acoustic information to guide us there. The subtleties of the seafloor were the only way that we were moving to this site, and we never would have captured this image. But why is it significant? And if we look at it, this is just another example of where sparse information is really a driver for building out a better map. And if we look at the deepwater sculpin, from a biomass density, it's a major contributor to the biomass of Lake Michigan, almost a quarter of it. And what that picture didn't show was this other species down here, the round goby, which is invasive to our Great Lakes and many inland lakes throughout the world. But together they make up 50% of the Lake Michigan biomass on the bottom. Both of these fish interact in terms of the goby is eating the sculpin eggs. And so what we didn't show in that image was the round goby was only 2 meters away from where that egg nest was found, and whether or not they survived through hatch is not known. But the implications of this are going to move up the food chain, and we need the critical information of the lake floor to understand where these habitats thrive or where they don't thrive, and how we can better manage these and make good decision making. The other thing that the Great Lakes are significantly known for is archaeological findings and shipwrecks. The Great Lakes have upwards of 8,000 to 10,000 believed shipwrecks. There are only, say, 2,000 or 3,000 that have been discovered or believed to be discovered. And what's changing is that if you look at the image on the left, that's a bowsprit of a cargo ship in Lake Huron that sank in the late 1800s. This picture was taken in the early 1990s, 1995. You can see that there's no mussel growth, none of the invasive species that had found this shipwreck. Now we go to about a year ago to the image on the right, and we're seeing a similar ship, different ship, but wooden, same depth, same lake, 20 years later, and now it's completely covered in this invasive species. So the idea of will we capture these images of newly found ships that can really open up that historical piece of the Great Lakes? We have to do it now before these wrecks are completely covered in these mussel colonies. And the wrecks are incredible. This is work that ETRAC did in the Straits of Mackinac in 2019. The ability for acoustics to image and showcase these shipwrecks is absolutely incredible. And so there's many more out there to be found. When you think about the need for nautical charting in the Great Lakes, we are ripe and readily available for smart shipping, both smart shipping routes from more information on the lake surface, buoys and meteorologic and oceanographic information, but also the detailed bathymetry that would allow better connections between smaller ports of opportunity, removing congestion from major throughways on land, and really promoting a better and more sustainable maritime trade environment throughout the Great Lakes. And we have major players working on this. The Smart Ships Coalition is an organization or a group of many different organizations, academic institutions, and others that are really looking at what those opportunities are in the Great Lakes. And then the other thing the Great Lakes have is ice. So we're a very unique environment that we do typically ice over each year. And so there are opportunities for testing systems that could otherwise be placed in an Arctic environment in our Great Lakes. Surface denied environments, ice covered environments are unique in that in the Great Lakes, we tend to not be able to image anything that occurs over the winter time. And so there are critical decisions that occur or critical events that occur under ice with our ecosystem that are completely unknown. So there's a great opportunity there. Also, when the lakes do freeze, it represents a very stable and highly accessible way of putting in systems that can work below the ice and continue to map throughout the year, where we don't have issues with wave climates that from storm events and things like that, even in the nearshore environment. So it does represent a great opportunity. When you think about the Great Lakes and how will it be mapped, this was some work that Gloss had initiated on looking at the costs and timeline. And I had used this slide that Tim gave me that looks at how we will do it. And when you think of water depth, you know, all lakes, this assumes this, in the next slide we'll go through this, but all lakes will be surveyed from shore to the 10-meter contour with LiDAR. And what we're finding though is the lakes are becoming clearer every year due to the impact of those invasive mussels. And we're finding LiDAR penetration is now approaching 20 meters. So a significant more contribution can be obtained and readily obtained from LiDAR approaches. The survey days, a typical navigation season for survey vessels might be around 200 days, plus or minus 20 days. If we start looking at through ice opportunities, now we can open up more ways of completing that map sooner. From the platforms, the times you're going to see are based on one ship and at least one launch from that ship. Now, if we start moving into the crewed and uncrewed, not unscrewed, but uncrewed vessels, we can maximize both the coverage and time. And then the assumption was that these standards would be surveyed to at least IHO Order 1 for the depths of less than 100 meters. And so what does that look like? In this study, it was $130 to $170 million to do this. Each lake, depending on its depth and area, had so many years of coverage. But if you look at it from a cost per square kilometer, it was anywhere from $600 in the deeper Lake Superior Lake to $2,000 per square kilometer for Lake Erie, our shallowest lake. And so these costs need to come down for us to be able to meet the goal of trying to get this done. Here's an example of one project that I mentioned with the shipwrecks. This is E-Track's work in the Straits of Mackinac. This was roughly 3,500 or 3,300 square kilometers. I believe it was a $3.5 million NOAA OCS contract, but on the order of 800 to 1,000 square kilometers. But this area is significant because it also represents the only area, or one of the only areas in the Great Lakes where we have oil transmission occurring beneath this strait. And it's a significant hydrodynamic implication in terms of where it's located. It's right in the middle of this strait, and this is what connects Lake Michigan and Lake Huron as one continuous lake. So there are enormous currents that are developed in this area that an oil spill would have significant ecological impact. And yet this is the only updated information we have of this area. And so there's lots of activity going on. There's lots of projects going on. There are just a more need for getting what everyone has already done on the plate, as we're seeing throughout the world. And so there is a lot of activity that is now starting to look towards combining all that information. Crowdsource bathymetry is a great opportunity with the Great Lakes. I mean, the US Great Lakes, I could just find the US information, but there are 1 million registered boaters on Great Lakes coastal communities. And depending on the size of those, if we can get towards outfitting some of these vessels, you can see significant ways that we could additionally grab information for supporting the mapping of the Great Lakes. Sail drone, I'm ending with this only because Tim and I have been working closely with Sail Drone and Brian Connon and looking at opportunities to bring in Sail Drone into the Great Lakes, looking at congressional appropriations for supporting that. And what an opportunity to not only have large area coverage, but also significant cost reduction to accomplish that coverage. And so ending, this was from our very first lake bed, and this was brought up by David yesterday when he and Eileen were, we were testing our slides yesterday afternoon, and that he goes, when you say the Great Lakes, do you mean the world's Great Lakes? And this was something that Helen brought up in the end of her slide, and that we need to think of the world's Great Lakes, and that the US Canadian Great Lakes are not the only Great Lakes of the world. So as we move forward and as we continue to build on this, we need to replicate these types of success stories throughout the world. So see you next year in Toronto. Please join us there, and thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Hans. That was fantastic. And I look forward to this global lakebed 2030 and getting involved in that. Perfect. It was great to see lots of chat happening as well in the chat, and it was all quite active. There was a couple of questions for Hans that were addressed in the question and answers, so pretty good. So we didn't do too badly on time. We're 8 minutes past 3, and I think we can finish up the session. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, our Fabian, David, Tommy, and Hans. And thank you so much for joining us and for everyone for getting involved. Hans was talking about crowdsource bathymetry, and that's a great opening or upper for our next session, which will be starting in 2 hours. And that's going to be on crowdsource bathymetry. It'll be moderated by Lyndon Brinks of the Great Lakes Observation System. So that it was a nice follow-up from Hans. Dr. Sohu is going to be restarting his presentation on December 1st at 6 p.m. East Africa time, and that will be in the Africa and Ocean session in 2 days. Because we're very sorry about the time issues that we had there. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And if there's any questions, please feel free to email them on and we can address them. And we'll see you at the next session for crowdsource bathymetry. Thank you.
Thanks, Aileen. Bye.
Thanks.